it looks like this. This is your product team, right? This could be multiple product owners or product manager, depending on the scale of the company and whatnot. You have your leadership. This is leadership, stakeholders, customers. They talk to product team, right? So this product discovery stage, blue dashed line, right? So they talk to product team. Then pre-grooming. Typically, I like to do pre-grooming because in most of the teams I manage, I learned that you do the grooming session with, let's say, 15 engineers, and then every now and then, 2 people talk, others are bored, right? Average cost of an engineer, let's call it $2,000 or $12.50. 15 people or 20 people in the room, that's what, like $200, $300 meeting? Expensive, right? So what I've learned is it's better to put engineering leads and product teams so that they pre-validate the quality of the stories, right? So that stories are detailed enough, they have acceptance criteria. The acceptance criteria cover not only the happy case scenario, but edge case scenarios as well, so that the team would be ready to give estimations. They will still ask questions, hopefully, but they will be able to do that. And typically, tech leads are responsible for that. So they ask clarification, they provide high-level estimation. With these high-level estimations, product team can prioritize the product backlog, right? And then you do the actual grooming with the engineers, and then they give the estimations. And from there, engineering team will give the more accurate estimations. The requirements would come from the backlog, the product backlog. Engineering teams would also talk about the capacity. They will provide capacity as an input. And then product team will provide the priorities, business priorities, and that's how you take the top of your product backlog into your sprint backlog and then start working on it, right? So within the sprint, once you go to the sprint execution, these are typical cases that you go through, right? You have a bunch of tasks to do, then you go into development stage where you work, hopefully you send for code reviews, right? And then you pass code review, you go to QA, and then if you pass QA, you go to UAT, right? And then whenever it's accepted, it's waiting for to be deployed if you don't have CI/CD, right? Very typical life cycle. If you have rejections, they would come back to do, etc. So from this framework, let's discuss. Ask yourself a question. How does your team decide how much task they should ingest into a sprint? Any options? Any answers? Say it again? Coin flip. Like again, like just like it depends, works every time, in any case. I've seen teams that do it. Yes.
Yeah, well, usually each developer has its own approximate velocity calculated according to.
Lovely. Each engineer would have its own velocity, and then based on the velocity, which is like how many story points is showing up through the sprint and whatnot, you can figure out how much each engineer can take, and then you sum it up, probably get a team, right? That's very good. That's very good. It's not that far from what I do. I've seen, unfortunately, it's not always the case. Unfortunately, there are teams who do, that's enough, right? They take like 20 tasks, 20, I think they will be able to do that, right? Very intuition-based. Some teams do slightly better. What they do is, all right, we have 10 engineers, and our sprint is 2 weeks, so that means 40 hours a week, 80 hours, right? A sprint, so 10 engineers, 800 hours, 800 man hours. Let's take 800 man hours. If they're slightly smarter, they would put a buffer, 30%, right? Again, like better, but not very data-driven, right? So what I came to understand is to measure the output. Remember we were saying what we want to measure, right? To be able to measure the output, you need to fix the input. And one of the first things in the input is your capacity. So that you don't put too much tasks, you don't put too little. If you put too much, your engineers burn out. If you put too little, they lose motivation and they relax, they get into conference, right? So individual and team capacity, like the gentleman said, once you figure out your individual capacity, you sum it up, you get your team capacity or discipline capacity, how many hours or whatever units of measure, back-end capacity you have, front-end capacity you have, QA capacity you have, yada yada, right? Estimation, how do we estimate, right? Somebody mentioned like story points. I'm not a big fan of story points. It's a very abstract concept that nobody really understands, me included. Like after 18 years of experience, I was saying like story point, like story? What kind of story? Points? Like what is it? Right? I came to conclusion that instead of having abstract story points, having same abstract hours is easier to understand. So in my teams, we measure in abstract average human hours, right? So how do you estimate it? Again, doesn't mean it works for you. If you're happy with story points, go ahead, whatever works for you. Allocation and utilization. How do you allocate staff, right? How do you allocate tasks to your engineers? And do you calculate utilization, right? Next ones are productivity and quality. So the last two are the things we want to measure. Remember we said we want to measure quality and speed at the same time, so we strike a balance, right? So these are the things that I focus on. Individual capacity. What is individual capacity? It's gross capacity minus reductions. And typically, reductions are public holidays, right? There could be public holidays between the sprint, right? So you need to account for that. Planned or unplanned leaves. Some of your engineers calls and hey, I'm sick, right? So that person lost capacity. There's nothing you can do about it. You might say like, hey, yeah, but they can cover, or I can reassign it to other engineers. Yeah, you can, but what if 2 engineers get sick? What if 3 engineers? Where do you draw that line where you need to push things out of the sprint, right? So unplanned leaves, planned leaves, shorter working days. Sometimes, right, doing Eid in Tashkent, I think they give you 2 hour shorter working day on some of the days, right? In Dubai, for example, during Ramadan, the working day is 6 hours instead of 8, right? Meetings, every engineer participates in a sprint planning, grooming, right? Retro, sprint review, daily stand-ups, right? So you need to account for that. Buffer, sometimes they need to do something unplanned, right? And I have a formula where like we remove like 4 hours for this, 2 hours for that, 30 minutes for dailies, and then we give 1 hour a day of buffer, which runs up to be 10 hours per sprint, which seems to be enough. And then your team capacity is the sum of your individual capacities. Estimation story points versus hours, I spoke about it. Sometimes less is more, something more simple is easier to scale in a larger team. So you don't have to imagine you have to explain a concept to 2,000 people, right? Everybody knows what's hours. Just to tell them it's an average hour, it's not your hour. Obviously, senior engineer would chew up, like velocity chew up through more average hours. And there's a solution for that as well. You just add a factor into utilization. And then individual estimation and poker estimation. I've noticed in some of the teams I consulted, they assign the teams to people, and then those people provide estimation. But there's a conflict there. If I'm assigned a task, and I'm going to estimate my own task, I am encouraged to inflate the estimation so that I can do it at ease, right? So it doesn't mean it's fair. So from that perspective, how did I do that? Oh wow, okay. How did I go back? I don't know, I have, okay, good. All right. So in my teams, I like to do poker estimation because it kind of makes it more objective, I guess, if it makes sense, right? So every backend engineer gives a vote. Let's say there's a backend task, and I'm like, how long? It's like 3 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, like 3 days, 4 days. And then somebody's like 7 days. All right, why 7 days? Let's discuss. Our goal is not to negotiate the estimations down, but make sure we understand where those estimations are coming from. Right? If an engineer who says 7 days comes with the valid reasons, hey, you guys have forgot about that complexity, you guys forgot about this complexity and whatnot, all right, fair enough. we put it 7 days, right? And then we add it to the details of the ticket, right? We add like these complexities,